Hey everyone, I'm Pankaj Rai, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can intelligently schedule your work in the background using Work Manager. But before I proceed towards Work Manager implementation, the first thing is that why do you need Work Manager? When there is already a job dispatchers, schedulers, and then alarm manager, all sort of things we have it, then why to bother about Work Manager? So you can think Work Manager as a replacement for all of them. However, there is one use case where if you want work to happen right at the exact time, like you're setting an alarm at 5 o'clock in the morning, you want that alarm to get triggered right at 5 o'clock, not to get deferred at 5:10, 5:15, 5:20. So for all those things, we still have alarm manager, and alarm manager is still good to go ahead with those kind of scenarios. But apart from that, for all other cases, work manager is a one-stop solution which can be deferred, and it gives you a guaranteed execution for the task. However, I'm talking about intelligence also. So what sort of intelligence do it can add? This sort of intelligence is nothing but the constraint which you can define here. You can define that do certain works when user is connected to internet, or they are on a metered network, unmetered network, or if their battery is not low. All sort of things you can specify with the worker. And now let's start how do we can add work manager to our project. So switch to Gradle and add the work manager dependency. So I'm using the KTX version of it. If you do not want to use the KTX version, then you can use the normal version also without KTX. But I prefer to use KTX because this gives you a shortened notation using the Kotlin features and also the suspend functions. You can use the suspend functions inside the do work. Okay, now let's start with the two main concept of work manager. So work manager start with worker, and the second case is scheduling your worker using the enqueue. So first of all, let me create a worker. Let me create say upload worker, and this should take two parameters. One is context and another one is worker parameters. Now here the implementation differs. If you are using non-KTX version, you'll extend worker. If you are using the KTX version, then it will be coroutine workers, and pass on these two parameters to this context and worker parameters. Finally, let's implement the method do work. And do work, this is a place where we do all sort of work which we want to do after a certain period of time or the one-time request. Now how do you know that whatever operation which you are doing is either successful or it's a failure? So for that, based on certain conditions, you could return like result dot failure or result dot success or result dot retry. Now these things are really useful to monitor this work request, like you're scheduling using the enqueue and then you're setting a live data to observe your worker. So whatever you define here, it understands based on that the execution has ended up with a failure or success or retry. Inside this, you can also pass contents like work data off, and you can specify any sort of content here. It takes the key value pair as a pair. So pair of key, so pair of string, comma any. You can give any sort of values here. Same way you can specify any sort of contents here. So by this way, when you return this success, it not only return this status as success, but it also return this data. And this is really useful because worker also supports you to feed its output data as input for the another worker if you are chaining them, and in those scenarios this is really helpful. Same way, if you want to read the data, This is all about sending. If you want to read the data, then you can use like input data dot get int or get boolean or any sort of things you can specify here. So now you have both the options. Here you can read and you can pass on the data to the next worker. And in the next worker, again, whatever data which you're specifying from this place, you can read using input data. Now let's see how can I run this worker. Let me return the success from here. And now let me schedule this. To schedule this worker, we have two options. We can either do one-time request or a periodic work request. One-time request is really useful if you want to execute the task only once and then just leave it. Periodic work request is useful in those scenarios where you want to execute certain part over and over. For example, sending the analytical data to the server. This could be a periodic work request. Compressing the images and then sending to server based on the user clicks or any certain things which you have defined in your app. Now this could be a one-time request because when user takes the snaps, then only you'll upload to the server. So based on your situation, your use case, you can use either one-time request or the periodic work request. Let me show you both of them. Let me create a one-time work request. One-time request builder where here I have to specify the worker class. Now this syntax will differ. If you are using the KTX version, you can specify here like just a generic way because under the hood it uses the refi to understand the data type. But if you are using the Java way, then it's like inside this parameters, you have to specify it like upload worker :class.java. Now with one-time request, this is really good to create an object, but here you can also specify certain things like constraints. Say that you want to have a constraints defined for this that do this only when device is getting charged, or say the network type is connected, then only execute this worker, otherwise just do not do it. So you can specify all those things in constraint, and there are many more. So take this constraint, give it to set constraints, and then if you want to add some sort of delay that you do not want to execute it immediately but with certain delay, then you can specify it here. Time unit, let me say 2 minutes, and then finally build. So by this way, now you have created a work request object, but this will not request your work. So you can think it like if you have a database for the work manager, this is just one of the entry in that. But to make it run, you need to enqueue it. And we are going to use on-demand initialization for the work manager. So I can do like work manager.get instance. By the way, I'm passing context. It's an on-demand initialization. And now I can enqueue it, or I can enqueue unique work. And that's it. Now, one of the disadvantages with this approach is like once this is getting executed multiple times, then this is going to add new entry in the database, which means that this worker will run multiple times. But my objective is not to run this multiple time. It's a one-time request which I want to run only once. If there are any such use cases where you want to run it multiple times, then enqueue is good to have. But if your use case is not like that, then instead of enqueue, what you should use is like enqueue unique work. where you give the unique work name, and this is important. If you change this, then this is not going to be unique anymore. And you can give any string here. Then the policy. This policy is like, if you are running this again, once again, with the same unique work name, and if it's already existing in the database, then what it should do. Keep means keep the old one and do not add the new one. And replace is like whatever you might be having initially, just remove it and add the new one. Just replace with the new one. So I don't want to replace with the new one, so keep. And finally, I can pass the one-time request object. That's it. So by this simple way, you can schedule your worker. And this will get triggered when the device is charging, when user is connected to internet, and it also respects the doze mode. So if your device goes into the doze mode, then it's not like exactly it will just wait for initial 30 minutes. It may get delayed a bit more also. So this is about one-time request. How about chaining multiple requests? So let me create one more worker, and let me give this as sort of upload worker. Let me give this as compress image worker, and one more with like compress video worker, and one more as analytical worker, analytics worker. So now I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 workers. I want to chain all of them. How should I do it? So for chaining, again come back to this place, and instead of giving this unique work here, what I'm going to do is I'll start with creating a list first, or I can say like work manager dot get instance application context dot begins with is like, again, if you are running it multiple times, it's going to start a new one. So I want begin unique work. Let me again give this as one time and existing policy as keep. And now here I have to specify the one-time requests. So let me pass one-time request here. After that, once this is done, I can specify then which work request do I need to execute. Let me copy this one. So let me create few more work requests. One-time work request. This one is for compress. This is for compress video. Above one is like for compress image. So now I have 3 work request builders. What I could do is like first initially run this upload worker, then compress image worker, then compress video worker. So I have object for all these 3. Initially start with upload worker. Once that work is done, then I want to compress the image. So I'll say like compress image. Once that is done, I want to compress video also. And then finally I want to enqueue it. So by this way you create a chain. It will first execute this, then come to this work request, and finally come to this. So by this way you can have like a synchronized work request. And if you want to have multiple requests which should run in parallel, then you can specify the list of. Rather than giving one-time request, I can say like list of one-time request, one-time compress and one-time video also. So now by this way, all three will execute parallelly. There's nothing called as chain for now. And then if you want to specify some other work request like I have for analytics, analytics worker, and now I can specify this. So by this way, what it means is that while scheduling this worker, run this one-time request, work one time for image compress and for video compress all parallelly. Once all these three are done, then only execute this, run this worker. So it means that. Now let's see about scheduling a work periodically. So this was all about one-time request. Let me leave the constraint as it is. Periodic work request. So periodic work request builder. Again, here let me give this as analytics worker. And inside this, I have to specify the other parameters. Like when do I want to start this? I could say like 15 time units dot minutes, or let me increase the time limit to 45 minutes. And let me give this as 30 time units to minute. With this, what it means is that I want this work request to get executed after every 45 minutes. However, because of the dose mode or the constraint limitation, this could be a probability that it may not execute it after 45 minutes direct. It could delay for around 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or the next 45 minutes slot. So by giving a flex time interval, what you can do is that you can specify the time interval, which means that here as I have given 30 minutes. So in between 30 to 45 minutes, whenever you find this constraints matching, then just run my periodic request. Okay, so now let's give a constraints. And finally, I do not want to give any other thing, so let me just build it. So by this way, I've created a periodic work request object, but I haven't scheduled it yet. Scheduling can only be done by work manager.get instance. By this way, you just create an object. So again, work manager.get instance application context dot enqueue unique periodic work. You also have a enqueue periodic work. If you do not want to have a unique periodic work, then you can use that. But again, the problem there is that if this screens run multiple times, then you'll have multiple periodic work requests. And by using the unique periodic work, you'll just have one time, even though this runs for 100 times. And this again identified with this name, whatever you are giving here. Existing policy, again, it remains same. What do you want to do once this gets executed once again? Either you want to keep the old one, or you want to replace the old with the new work request. And finally, you can specify the periodic work request. That's it. Okay, so this was all about scheduling the worker. And now how about keeping track of the running workers? So if you have a periodic work request, then what you can do is like, again, use work manager.get instance application context dot you can set a live data observer by ID or by tag. See, I already have this periodic work request and I want to listen it based on the ID. So I can do that. Then I can set an observer, this comma observer. However, if you do not have an ID, like You might have created it long before, but now you do not have ID for the work request. Then another best concept here is that while creating this request, you can add a tag. And you can add tag like any string, you can add it here. But remember that this has to be unique. You cannot have a multiple request here, because if you do not have this as a unique one, then this is going to overlap with the existing work request. Now create a work manager, get instance, application context, and again, this time instead of ID, you can get it based on tag, where you have to specify the tag which you have given while creating this request. And finally, set the observer. So these are the two ways through which you can keep track of the running work request. So you can like schedule the worker, keep track of the running workers, and finally, based on certain actions, like once the request is completed, you can take appropriate actions. For example, here you get output data, the progress for it, and the states. So that's it in this video. I hope this might be useful for you to understand about how you can use Work Manager, how you can schedule a one-time request or a periodic work request. And if you have liked this video, then hit the like button, subscribe the channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you, and stay tuned for the upcoming videos.